So Ryan, it's good to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to introduce this group of first year Emory medical students, and we're working on a CLSM project at the Marcus Autism Center,
Mhm.
and we're learning a lot about autism this year. And we're really excited that you were able to come talk to us today via Zoom. And so, just to start out, if you would maybe just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I'm Ryan, and I have ASD, like you sound like you may have heard. You see, I was diagnosed when I was 3 years old. I didn't know until I was 14 or I was 15 when my parents told me. But even before I knew I was diagnosed, I always knew I was different from the other kids. Like, always felt like an oddball. Like, I always wondered why I couldn't be accepted or why I couldn't, fit in. I felt like so isolated. And most times as a kid, I would go into my own little world, and people used to call that dreamland.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So, not knowing that you had this diagnosis until age 14, I'm curious if you had any sort of intervention between the diagnosis at 3 years old and kind of you learning more about it at 14.
Well, my mom had me tested when I was 3,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't really knowing. All I knew something was up. I didn't ask questions to myself like, "What is wrong with me?"
Mm-hmm.
But I always knew I was different in my own way. I still had to fun. Also, for another example, sometimes I would think up something funny scenes in my head that I saw, and then I'd laugh for no reason. So it was just hard because I always loved a good laugh, but sometimes it just happened for no reason.
And I'm sure that was confusing growing up with the other people. Maybe you weren't understanding them super well, and maybe they weren't understanding you, like when you were laughing.
Yeah, and it's not just that. Throughout middle school and high school, even though I had friends growing up, they
Mhm.
never made me feel like, one of them. And, I always felt like someone you just see at school, like every day. And only or school related stuff like football games, homecoming, prom, or other school related events like plays. But I never got invited to parties outside of school. You see, I always felt left out, and I always wanted to be more than someone you see at school. But I felt like they just didn't understand, no matter how much I tried. And it was hard connecting with people because I just didn't know how to. So let me ask you all this.
Sure.
Growing up while you were in middle school or high school, how
Mhm.
many of you ever felt the way I did? Like, how many of you walk into school every day and wonder if anyone really cares?
That's a fantastic question. Yeah, I can go ahead and raise my hand right now.
And there are two more.
Yeah, Ryan, I moved around a lot growing up, so I was always the new kid, and so I can totally remember feeling that way of, well, no one knows me, nobody cares, and I can show up to school and show up to class, and then kind of almost invisible. I think that might be a more prevalent in middle school and high school than people realize.
Yeah, and there's two other questions. Or how many of you wondered whether you're wearing the right clothes, listening to the right music, or watching the right TV shows to relate to the others?
No, no,
Yeah.
sure.
And the last one is, or how many of you have ever been hurt when you found out about a party or a social you were never invited to by seeing it on social media?
Recently, no.
Yeah, that used to happen to me a lot. And also, being autistic, being a high autism can be very difficult. You see, I used to encounter people telling me all the time that I don't look autistic, and I feel like I have to respond to them. Well, how the heck am I supposed to look then?
That's a great point. Is
Yeah,
there anything that you wish you could tell yourself, that earlier version of yourself, that you know now?
well, just try to be yourself. And if people don't appreciate the real you, then it's their loss. There's also a lot of difficult things about being on the spectrum. Like, one of the most hardest things is not being able to pick up on emotional cues right away based on one's body language or facial expressions. And someone will just ditch you or don't want to be around you for one stupid reason or another if you're doing something that's making them uncomfortable. and they just leave you in the dark, and that's not fair.
No.
They
Yeah.
should tell us what they're feeling, and so we can fix it. It's not the end line. But unfortunately, some people just aren't really direct with how they're feeling. It also connects to this myth that autistics lack or show no empathy. For years, people depicted us as socially emotionless, clueless robots.
Mm.
Like, we can too show empathy. It's just in a different way. If only people could be more direct with how they're feeling, then we're more likely to show it.
Absolutely. I think communication between any group of people is incredibly, incredibly important. Which actually reminds me of one of the questions we were kind of brainstorming before we got on this call. Is there anything that you wish you could tell a group of budding physicians in front of you as to how you would like to be cared for as someone who has ASD?
Yeah, well, I just want to feel like we autistics, we shouldn't feel the need to hide anything, and something else, like those on the higher spectrum as well. Having an invisible disability is challenging in many ways. It's not fair that the world keeps on telling us to improve, keeps on telling us to change, and keeps on saying we need to be more appropriate. But just because we can talk, say sentences perfectly, and have verbal language, it doesn't change the fact that we are still on the spectrum. Sometimes it's hard for us to find words to express what we want to say, and hard for us to remember what others are saying. And one thing is some autistics are very blunt and literal, and we have no filter, and that includes verbal filter or sensory processing filters. We say what's on our mind, exactly how we think. Because if we don't, we lose what we're trying to say.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Right.
and also another thing. People whose disability can be invisible, we're very aware of our own difficulties, and we're extremely sensitive to others' negative reactions. Autism is a word to characterize how our brains functions, but people still see us as broken people, and that hurts.
I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan,
Any other questions you had for me?
I had an additional question because you talked about how you appreciate direct communication.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as when your experience of navigating the healthcare system in general, so like going to doctors' visits, seeing many different providers, can you talk a little bit about how that is for you?
Well, when I was in middle school and high school, I went to see a therapist at Peachford Hospital. Well, at least they're very direct with communication.
Mhm.
But I hardly had any checkups about my health conditions, like cholesterol. They were direct about that. But unfortunately, since insurance is really hard to find these days, I haven't had a lot of checkups lately. I just try to keep living the best life I can and try to eat healthy and exercise more. Although I do have to admit, sometimes I get a craving for sugar.
You and me both.
Ryan, I wanted to ask you a quick question. You said you found out that you had ASD at 14. How was that experience for you, being told about that?
Well, I felt confused and isolated, Like, I think I said this in one of my articles one time. I felt so ashamed of my autism. I felt angry, depressed, confused, impatient. And sometimes I expressed it so intensely, I started hurting people physically and mentally. I even started breaking rules, and I didn't care that I got in trouble. But I tried to be like everyone else. But it took me a while to realize that I can't be like everyone else. And what I can say is it was easy for me to love others, but I didn't love myself.
So it sounds like having a specific diagnosis to attach to this experience that you'd had your whole childhood. You said you've always felt different. Mm-hmm. Having a label to put on that different feeling wasn't necessarily the most helpful for you initially. I'm curious, do you find it helpful to have a specific label or name to point to as far as finding community goes?
Well, no, because I want people to see that I am more than just a label, that I can still be a good person. I can still be a friend.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm proud to be autistic, you know, and I wouldn't change who I am for anyone else. But still, it's just hard to fit into a world that doesn't always fit you. I know sometimes I get frustrated for not understanding stuff like you. Like most people on the spectrum with other disabilities, I just want to be understood and accepted. And I shouldn't be told to act like a normal person because there is no normal. My brain just works differently. I know I can be quirky at times, but I'd still want you to bear with me. And that's what I keep trying to tell people.
Absolutely. Well, I think you're doing a great job using your platform and your voice to spread that message. And we're really excited to share this information with our classmates who will be future physicians and who are just people operating in the world, to hopefully bring awareness to all of those things that you were saying, that yes, you may have this label or this diagnosis, but that makes you no different than anyone else. And we're all quirky and have our own unique traits anyway. And everything's a spectrum, right?
Yeah, there's a bit more you should know. Like, some people just don't know what it's like to be autistic. They assume the worst about us autistics, like we're stalkers, violent, incapable, and other negative stereotypes. Even all we want to do is just be friends. And there's also this big fuss about personal space, one way or the other. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're trying to hurt anybody. We don't always understand the rules of how far away to stand or when to stop talking or asking questions. And I admit that I'm a big hugger. I've shown my affection. But because of things like those, or like even aggression or meltdowns, people view autism as a source of annoyance, disappointment, or worse in different ways, to different degrees. And that's why I keep advocating, because there needs to be more tolerance. And don't forget that there are some who would take advantage of an autistic's desire to have friends. Believe me, I used to be taken advantage of a lot back in middle school and high school. Like, they can pretend to be our friends, and when we do something out of the ordinary, they'll make sure other people will see it somehow, and will be made fun of and bully. Like, one of my friends who was on the spectrum, when he was befriended by this strange guy, when he did something out of the ordinary, they posted on Snapchat, and he was bullied about it for a long time. And that can really emotionally scar you.
I can imagine this is a really hard time with bullying in any regard, with the amount of social media and the ease of access. I know when I was going through that part of schooling, people didn't have cell phones, people weren't really doing that. So I can imagine that's had a really negative impact. And I'm sorry for your friend and for the experiences you've had as well.
Yeah, it's still hard growing up on the spectrum. Like, you knowing you're different than everyone else, not knowing what you are.
But I wanted to say too, Ryan, that I think it's really cool that as a self-advocate, you are using things like social media, so your YouTube channel, different articles, and doing that to actually spread positive message about what autism actually is.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I have to admit that I still don't fully know myself. I'm still trying to learn more myself. And I still have flaws. Like, sometimes I get easily irritated when I feel like I'm interrupted, or when I feel like no one listens. Like, I still have that problem, you know? But one thing I get tired of is people telling me to not react when I hear something I don't want to hear. I mean, even if we do have some control over our emotions, we still can't turn them off. So you can't expect us to not react all the time.
Absolutely.
Yep. And there is one talk that you should know about. You see, you must have heard that people have been talking about trying to cure autism. But there also has been a talk that something about trying to separate our symptoms from autism, like trying to be able to keep our autism. I'm sure most of you know about The Good Doctor, right? On ABC.
Yeah.
You see, the main character, Sean Murphy, has autism, but he's also very smart with Silent syndrome. And it's like they think without his symptoms, he can still be smart, but not be socially awkward or not being loved. I mean, that's not how it works. I mean, with the symptoms, it's like a package deal, you know? Either we're born with it or we're not. And speaking of Silent syndrome, it's very rare, you know? And they get the most mainstream media attention from the media because of their amazing gifts of analyzing and calculating. And there's a stereotype that autistics are geniuses with special gifts, and not every autistic is built that way.
I have a question for you, Ryan. You've talked about myths surrounding autism, or people telling you to act one way or another. Who have you found that's putting that pressure on you? And also, who would you say has been your support through all of this? I mean, this is rough stuff to deal with. Who's kind of been there to help you out?
Well, mostly like few of my friends,
Okay.
and a counselor of mine who I go to sometime in Roswell. And I feel like a few of my family doesn't really understand how I go.
Mhm.
And when growing up, like people in my old church used to talk bad about me behind my back, saying that I won't succeed and I'm not as smart as the other kids. And I felt like I was put under a lot of pressure, like trying to be the best, trying to be the top. But I still, it still hurts of thinking how much I hated it, because all I wanted to do was just be me.
Yeah.
And it's just hard, like knowing that you're different, but everyone learns at their own pace. And the thing is, like, you don't have to be a genius or have a special talent to contribute to society. Every person on the spectrum, including those who are nonverbal, has something to contribute. You just have to find out what it is. And to be honest, I'm still trying to figure out who I am. Well, while I was in college in Tuskegee University, I went there for 5 years. You see, I majored in animal science, and I thought it was what I wanted to do because I used to love animals as a kid. It was very tough, but after I graduated, I found out the animal field was a lot harder than I thought it would be, very overwhelming. I worked in a dog daycare center. Like, can you imagine how overwhelming it is trying to handle 60 dogs in one room? And the second animal job I had was in a vet office, Dunwoody Animal Medical Center. It turns out that handling sick animals is on a whole different level than I would thought it would be, and it was quite overwhelming. So I think, was it the right choice for me? But I'm taking a break from that field. So I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do. I'm still finding my way. But I do like advocating because I know I'm sending a good message out there. And I don't know how far it'll take me, but I know I'm going to keep trying. I'll figure it out as long as I go.
Absolutely. And this message is something that's going to, I know, reach so many people who are not on the spectrum and people who are on the spectrum, and provide comfort to those who may be going through similar things, and provide insight so that those who are not on the spectrum or those who do not understand ASD can be more understanding and compassionate in those moments that you clearly have had negative interactions. So hopefully that will minimize going forward through this wonderful advocacy you're doing.
Yeah, like for us, people should get to know us autistics by who we are, not how much or how little we act normally. And they shouldn't judge us for superficial traits we present on the outside. They should get to know us on the inside.
Absolutely.
Well, Ryan, I just wanted to say we appreciate you spending time with us and talking to us today and just sharing a little bit about your story. I just wanted to ask if you had any last parting remarks that you would share with the Emory medical students who will see this video.
Well, it's just important to remember that autism is autism. And regardless if we act different, we still have feelings, just like anybody else. So take the time to get to know us. And it just takes patience and understanding. And if we do something out of the ordinary, just don't take it the wrong way. Like, we're still just trying to live and be happy,
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.